and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not News, your favorite podcast about fake news. I'm Kelly.
And I'm Beth.
Oh, Beth.
I'm sick, Kelly.
You are sick. Beth has the flu, everyone. It's terrible, but it's also the first time I've been really glad we don't record in the same room.
I actually figured something out, though. I think this is a conspiracy.
That you have the flu?
Yes, because here's why. It has infiltrated almost all of America, and it causes you to do a lot of coughing, which is also hacking. So this is the Russian flu, Kelly.
It is the Russian flu. I like it.
Infiltrated by the Russians. They're trying to take us down.
Literally from the inside.
Literally. Yes.
Oh.
So this week we're going to do an interview with Vanessa Otero from MediaBiasChart.com. And I was so excited. This was going to be your first interview. And then
I was excited as well.
And then I was like, hey, Kelly, guess what? You get to do it by yourself.
It was okay. It was okay. I think I had a great conversation. Vanessa and I had a great conversation. We missed you, but I was glad that we were still able to do it.
I think even though we would have been in separate rooms, you guys would have been like, please stop talking to us.
Maybe. We still love you, Beth.
I would have been just hacking in the corner. Okay. Well, let's do our Spread Jam Not Lies and then get into the interview, okay?
Let's do it.
So this week for my Spread Jam, I'm going to recommend The Boxer by Mumford & Sons.
Oh, I love that song.
Me too. And you know what? I found out after I heard it from Mumford & Sons is that it's actually a remake of a Simon and Garfunkel song.
Yes.
So I listened to the Simon and Garfunkel version. But the reason I'm recommending is because I'm biased for the Mumford & Sons version. I like
are you?
It much better.
Oh, we're going to have to agree to disagree on this one. I'm a huge Simon and Garfunkel fan, and I just love them so much. I do like the Mumford & Sons version, but I love you know what? We can put both up on the blog this week.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's whichever you hear first. It's like if you read a book and then you see the movie, you're going to like the book better most of the time. Or if you see the movie first, you're going to like the movie better most of the time. So it's one of those things where it's just whichever one you hear first. But I'm also extremely partial to Mumford & Sons, so that's probably part of it too. But that's my biased jam of the week.
Are you boxing your way out of the flu?
I wish. Yeah. Oh my God, this flu is no joke. Like, and people have been saying that, and you get it, and you're like, oh, but I'll be fine in 2 days. No.
Yeah, no. I talked to you on Sunday, which was 4 days ago now, and I could hear through the phone how much pain you were in. It was very, 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 very scary to me. I was like, oh, this is really bad.
I've been being really careful because for one thing, this is the flu that is killing people. And what it is if you have predisposed things, like if you're predisposed for a heart attack or a stroke, that's what actually can kill you after the flu, is you have the flu and then you start to get better and then you'll have a heart attack or a stroke or you'll get pneumonia. And what I've really learned with this flu is having the flu is not about throwing up. It's a respiratory illness.
Yeah.
And I think most people think, oh, it's just a cold, but it's not. They stuck the thing up my nose and called me the next day and said, yes, you have influenza A. So, yeah. But you do have to be very careful. So I've taken off work. I'm not going in because you have to give your body that time to heal and get better. And you can't be lulled into the fact that, oh, I feel better, so I must be better. Because I'll feel better for like a half an hour. And then I'm like, yeah. I have to take a nap. The other day, I walked from my bedroom to my living room, and then I had to take a nap. So it's a very slow recovery. But anyway, if you are sick and you're listening to this, God bless you. Get better.
Yeah, we all hope you get better.
Yeah. So Kelly, if anybody is well enough to listen to a book this week, what would you recommend?
I would recommend, I'm actually trying to listen to all books from people of color for Black History Month.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I'm in the middle of reading one that I absolutely adore. I love Roxane Gay. I loved Bad Feminist. And the book I'm reading right now is her newest book, which is called Hunger, which is just, it's heartbreaking. It's self-reflective. It is a book that I have had to pause several times because you get that goosebump feeling of she is talking about me.
Oh, wow.
I don't understand how she sees into my soul and knows exactly how I feel. But I mean, she's got a little bit of a different background. She was skinny for a while in her life, and then she had a personal experience that made her turn to food as a comfort, and very quickly got very heavy. And it's about that in her life. I've never been skinny. So my life, I've always grown up bigger. And it's all about being a larger person in this world. So, you get to a point where she's already growing up as a person of color, having that experience. But then on top of that, having what a lot of people would consider something that it's still perfectly fine to make fun of fat people.
Right.
And that's an issue. So she talks about how hard it is sometimes just to be out in public with her body, and the fact that people constantly want to talk to you about your body. And I thought that was it's a way of it's not just one thing. It's multiple things that you're dealing with on a daily basis where people are looking at you and automatically making assumptions about you, or they have a set mindset of what you are and what you do and how you live your life.
Yeah. Interesting. So what's the name of that book again?
The name of the book is Hunger, and it's by Roxane Gay.
And she's going to be a guest on Love It or Leave It coming up. We just saw.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I just saw that this morning.
So Love It or Leave It is another podcast that we listen to by the Crooked Media guys. And he has a panel of guests. And actually, if you want to listen to our experience with going to Love It or Leave It, we recorded a Patreon-only episode about it. And as soon as I can breathe again, I'll probably get that posted. It's all ready to go.
Your respiratory tract is much more important.
Yes. Sorry about that. Okay. So without further ado, let's learn all about media bias from Vanessa Otero.
Let's do it. So, Vanessa, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me on, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight.
No problem.
I thought we could start by you giving us a little bit of background about who you are and how you started MediaBiasChart.com.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a patent attorney in Denver, Colorado, and I started a blog called All Generalizations Are False. I thought it was a funny phrase, and it turns out Mark Twain came up with that. So all generalizations are false is itself a generalization. So it is also false, meaning that some generalizations are true. There's just so much to it. But I'm kind of a word nerd. I love reading and writing and analysis, which is why I'm a patent attorney. And I created it in the wake of seeing the kind of information that people would spread on social media. And one of the things that really bothered me, just from a logical standpoint, were memes that were really short and pithy that people would use to support their political opinions. And usually when they're really short and pithy, they just fall apart under scrutiny. So there are certain things like, if guns kill people, then spoons make people fat. And that's just a terrible analogy, but the reasons why it's not a very good analogy, you kind of have to write a lot of words about in order to explain. So I took that upon myself to explain things like that on my blog, which for people who like to read 3,000 or 4,000 words, they find that enjoyable, but that's not most people. So what led to the media bias chart was I was just talking to friends about the quality of news. And I noticed, especially in the last, not just the last 2 years, with the campaign and the election and everything, but even before that, the kind of news that people would share would alarm me sometimes in terms of how badly written it was or how very biased it was. And I would notice people who are very intelligent not be able to differentiate between good quality and bad quality or something that's very biased or more neutral. And then the arguments that would ensue on social media about those articles were just very vague, and they were generalizations themselves. So people would say, oh, well, that's biased, or that news source is garbage. And that's just not very specific. It's not a very specific criticism. And so it's really hard to convince other people when your criticism is non-specific. So knowing that this is my job day to day is to write long explanations of what inventions are, but also to draw pictures of them, because the pictures really explain what the words mean. I wanted to put this in a picture form, and I really just did this so I could have a good conversation with my friends about what I meant when something was more biased or less biased, left or right, or higher quality or low quality, up and down. And I just came up with the idea of this graph so people could see it visually. And because, people love sharing pictures, this is why they like sharing these, short pithy memes in the first place, it was popular. And at first I just shared it on my own Facebook page, and I'm not a social media guru. I didn't even know there was a public setting on Facebook shares. And so I shared it on my page, and 8 people shared it. And to me, I thought, wow, that is popular. 8 people.
Right.
That was more than anything else I had written was shared. But then a couple months later, a friend of a friend who is social media savvy posted it publicly on his page, and then 20,000 people shared it.
Wow, so 20,000 people shared it from your friend's page.
Yes.
And that's how it got to the point where, I did a quick Facebook search of it before we started talking tonight, just to see, how this was out there in the public sphere. And it definitely has a good presence there. There's a lot of people who've talked about it. There's a lot of people who've shared it. I do recommend anyone who hasn't seen it, please go check it out. You can, I scaled it down to 74% in order to print it out on one page. It's still perfectly legible. And I put it up in my office so I can take a look at it, because a lot of times we go to Media Bias Fact Check to check our sources for this podcast. And this gives me a way that I can just glance over, because I'm in that one I'm usually putting in, but it's usually I don't know for a source. But I was really impressed with there's deep analysis done in this. And I was really impressed to see just some of the things. I was shocked at how biased they are, because I guess I wouldn't think Occupy Democrats. I did not expect them to be quite that far down. I knew they were bad, but I didn't realize quite how far bad they were. InfoWars did not shock me at all where it sits, because it is right there in the bottom corner, as it should be.
Right.
But, there are other ones that, I expected to be a little bit higher, or not necessarily higher, but, like The Economist, I don't normally in my head think, I guess it is really complex analysis, but I guess when I've read it, I don't see it skewing. It seems like it skews a little bit conservative on the chart. It sort of folds over just a tad bit. And I guess in my mind, I had always just seen it as this Economist sort of very non-biased.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have this just visual reference. I think it's a very good tool for anybody to be able to use.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's the reason why it was widely popular is because it is helpful to people who are not very sophisticated about their news source, and it generates really good discussion about with people who are very sophisticated. So I've had the most wonderful commenters on my blog and on Facebook posts over the last over a year now, talking about the particular nuances of individual sources. Like you mentioned The Economist, and a lot of people are surprised that it's used conservative because it's a European publication, and it says that it's centrist, but it promotes like liberal, like fiscal policies, which is what they say. But European economic liberalism is more akin to American fiscal conservatism. So like free markets and capitalism being a good thing is like considered liberal in Europe, but conservative in the United States. So those kind of nuances, you wouldn't necessarily get into those conversations with very sophisticated news readers unless you had something like this. It's really driven a lot of conversation. And then it's driven a lot of, thanks from people who just have no idea how to differentiate news sources. And they're like, thank you for this. I'm just going to stick to the green boxes from now on. It makes my life easier.
That was actually a question that I had for you. I've talked about before that I like to use a news aggregator. I use one audio first thing in the morning where I say to Google, good morning, and it'll give me just a rundown, and you'll get news from, I usually listen to the first 5, which goes anywhere from NPR to Fox News to a couple of other just relatively middle of the road sources. Because I do that, but because I have this background now of being able to spot the bias, I feel like it gives me a wide range of what's going on in the world, what other people are thinking, not just the facts, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Sort of AP routers, you always learn in journalism school, those are the two that are always, they're just the facts. That's all you get. Do you recommend that if you have sort of that savvy knowledge, or do you think it's better just instead of trying to be aware of everything in your surroundings, do you think that it might be better just to stick with 1 or 2 trusted sources so you're not getting overwhelmed with news?
I think aggregators present interesting problems, and they vary, again, depending on readers' sophistication. So somebody who's aware of the various biases and differences in quality can spot those things in an aggregator. Like you immediately recognize that Fox News is conservatively biased, and so that informs your listening of that news. But for other people, they just think that what shows up in their aggregator is the most reliable, and that's not necessarily true. This is true for, I find Apple News as an aggregator to be awful. Even if you mute channels or hide them, they still show you things that are from disreputable sources or very small sources, or have extreme clickbait in the headlines, just mixed in with your New York Times articles and Wall Street Journal articles. And there doesn't seem to be much of a sense to why they present those to you. Now, all these aggregators that just present news like that are run by algorithms. And I think Google, for example, has made a concerted effort to promote the higher quality content, but you still get, every once in a while, get some really questionable sites. So aggregators, I think apps where you can actually control the kind of sources that come to you. There are several apps that you can do that with. I think those are helpful. And if you want to get a good sense of the left, right, middle spectrum, you can select sources that they're politically biased, but at least maintain some kind of standard of quality. It would be more reliable to choose your own from the left, right, and center in an aggregator app like that, rather than have those presented to you by Google or Apple or YouTube. Big problems with that. Facebook and Twitter, though, also present news in an aggregate. I mean, I consider Facebook and Twitter news aggregators because what they show you is driven by algorithms that have really nothing to do with quality or bias.
Right. And I would absolutely agree. I know so many people that rely on just Facebook for their news, or maybe not rely on Facebook for their news, but when they see a news source on Facebook, especially I would say a year and a half ago, when there wasn't as much talk about whether news sources have these kind of biases, and it wasn't nearly as clear what was going on. You would see people who would post articles, or they would just believe articles that were posted on Facebook. And, you always have the don't ever go into the comments because that's where the trolls live. And, that's the bridge they live under now. So, yeah, I definitely would say that Facebook and Twitter fall under there. I think that you make a good point. If you do use a news aggregator, you could certainly use your chart to decide which news sources you want to have in there, because there are some that you don't. I know my news aggregator that I've used in the past, I've written them personally and said, why do you still have the Federalist articles on there?
Right.
That's insanity. There's a difference between having, say, something like the Washington Times or, even the Examiner, and then having something like the Daily Caller or the Blaze or the Federalist. I wouldn't want them to have that side on the liberal side either. Like, I know just from personal experience, I don't really trust Huffington Post. There are definitely sources on the liberal side. I would never say that it's only one side. It does seem like there's maybe a larger number on one side, but that doesn't mean that it's never been a one-side game.
Right. And that's absolutely correct. I think it was really harmful when people didn't really have an awareness of before the discussion of fake news was a big thing. There was just really no filtering of sources on Facebook, for example, like the layout of an article from the New York Times, how it appears in your feed just looks the same as the layout of the Conservative Tribune. And people had a really hard time differentiating news from opinion. And I think that became a big problem.
So when I first heard about your chart, the question that I had was, why was this created? And both Beth and I loved the section on your site, the part that says, and this is a direct quote from your site, so why should you listen to me about the quality of news sources? You shouldn't. In fact, you shouldn't listen to anybody who tells you that you should think or believe a certain thing in a certain way. This is a great statement to make, because I think what you're saying is, listen, you don't have to trust me. I made this chart, but you can take this chart and go research it yourself. And I think that that's a great thing to put out there is, there's no such thing as a 100% trusted source. Everyone views the world through their own lens. So it's up to you to put in the effort if you really want to make sure that you're trusting what you're reading.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think it's hilarious when people say, the media is so liberal and so biased. And that's a really broad generalization to categorize all of the media in one, with one description, because the media is this huge universe of hundreds and thousands and millions of sources, journalists, articles, and content, right? So if somebody says, this is a favorite trope of some news source or some sources, I should say, is to say, don't trust what the media is telling you. And they are literally the media themselves that are telling you this. So, or when people post articles that say, this is what the media is not showing you or not reporting, and it's a link to a news story. Obviously, the media just reported it. Like, maybe it's not as popular as you think it should be, but the universe of the media generally does a good job of pushing facts and stories forward so that you can find them. So I just, when somebody says, don't believe what somebody else is telling you, I think that's a big red flag. When somebody says, we're the only ones that are telling you the truth about this subject, that's another red flag. Like, why would only one source be interested in telling somebody the truth? The journalists have enormous incentives to tell the truth. That's where all the awards and recognition and satisfaction of the job comes from, is from reporting and uncovering stories. When people say, I have this secret scoop and no one else is telling me this except for me, people feel like special and part of a club. But this is maybe a website or a TV show that reaches millions and millions and millions of people. So obviously it's not that big of a secret. Them saying, I'm the only one that's telling you this, it just really falls on its face because they're telling this to millions and millions of people. And obviously, so they are the media that is reporting a particular fact. So I just find that hilarious that people still fall for it. And so
right.
I get the question a lot on my blog. Like, well, aren't you biased? Or this whole, I'll just get a statement like, well, this whole chart is biased. Obviously, you're liberal, you're progressive, this is totally subjective. And people ask me what my biases are and if I am biased. And to that I say, of course I am biased because I am a human being. There are no unbiased human beings.
Right.
But when you're evaluating the bias of any particular source, I think it's important to ask whether the bias is appropriate for the medium. And so I'll happily tell people that I consider myself moderately liberal. And so people can do one of two things in interpreting the chart in view of that information. Here's one suggestion people have given me. It's not always in the kindest fashion, but they say your whole chart should be just moved one over to the left. Like all the sources should be moved over one column to the left, meaning the neutral sources should all be labeled as skews liberal because I skew liberal, and so what things that I think are mainstream should be liberal. And I think that's fine because if somebody wants to just shift over everything on the chart one to the left, and then they agree that still the relative positioning of the sources on that chart are then generally accurate, then they can use a chart in that way. They can just say, all right, most of the mainstream, neutral media skews a little bit liberal, but there's stuff that's way, way out there to the left, and there's stuff that's pretty out there to the right. Or they can take the information of me being moderately liberal. I think I can put myself kind of in the skews liberal column and then look to the sources to my right and say, they frame those issues in a more right than I would frame those issues. And I can look to the sources on the left and say they frame those issues more left than I would frame them. So I think I can recognize what's still left and right of me, but people can use that chart with either interpretation, and I think it's still valid. I don't think people need to just throw it away just because I am biased.
Well, and I think that's absolutely correct. And again, I don't think that I completely agree with you. I don't think that there's a non-biased person because I think everyone just experiences the world. We can't have a non-bias. You can have just facts and, no one wants to read that for the most part. I mean, even AP articles normally have use of AP articles and then they'll give you information inside of it. But a lot of times the reporters will use that AP or Router's information and then take that information and turn it into a story because they're a little dry. I mean, they're reporting on the scenes. So I think that that's a great way to look at it is, even if you feel like this skews, you can still use it. Mm-hmm. Just skew it if that's what you think. And I think that would still I don't know that I would put InfoWars under just hyper-partisan as opposed to most extreme, but that's because I skew liberal. So, I look at it and I think that's a very damaging.
And I invite people to, you fill out a blank chart. I make the prints of my blank chart available on my site. And that's actually a good exercise that a lot of educators have implemented in their classes. I hear from high school teachers and college professors all over the country, which I'm really heartened by. And because they're teaching media literacy, one of their favorite exercises is to have students look at a source or a couple of sources and then place them on the chart, a blank one, using their own reasoning. And I think that critical thinking is the most important skill. And obviously teachers think that as well. And they just want their students to support their thoughts with arguments, their opinions with arguments. That's, I think the value of the chart is in the taxonomy, the framework itself, like, having a right to left spectrum and having a top to bottom spectrum.
Right. And as you bring that up, I want to discuss a little bit about an article that you sent us on from the Stanford University website about a study that they just did regarding digital literacy curriculum. You had sent us an article about how researchers are finding students have trouble judging credibility. And they did this research with middle school, high school, and college students and found shockingly that they are much farther behind than I ever would have considered, to the point of what I believe it was high school students weren't recognizing things that were clearly marked sponsored advertisement or sponsored content. Yes, that was in middle schools, but 80% of them did not recognize that sponsored content was not a real news story, that is, an advertisement inside of the news. So I'm shocked, but at the same time, I'm heartened by the fact that this is becoming part of the curriculum in schools. Do you see that happening? Do you find that you said that some schools have reached out to you to use this chart and to use blank versions of the chart? Do you find it heartening that we're getting to this point, or are you sad that it's taken this to get this to this point?
I think we're just learning to cope as a society. We're learning to cope with this massive amount of information, and every time in history that we've had these breakthroughs in communication, whether it be trading routes or the printing press, our world has gotten closer and better and more peaceful. And I'm optimistic that will also happen with the internet, but for this temporary time, it seems to be polarizing and driving people farther apart just because we don't know how to use this information. Like our information distribution has surpassed our ability to absorb it. Media literacy appears to be a burgeoning topic and curriculum in high school and middle school. There are journalism departments and professors in colleges that have been teaching these subjects for years, but it's becoming more and more apparent that it's necessary in high school and middle school. And what I found interesting about this study was that they found that people who were able to detect stories that weren't reputable, accurate, or fake were the ones that read laterally, meaning they would just spend a little bit of time on one site and then they'd go check other sources for that to verify. And the people who had a hard time detecting quality or bias would just spend a lot of time trying to look at who's on the site, such as pictures and fonts and how pretty the site looked and superficial things like that. So I think it is a burgeoning topic, but I think high school teachers are still find it difficult to teach because bias is still really hard to detect unless you're knowledgeable about the underlying subject. So political bias is difficult if you don't know what the issue is. And a lot of high schoolers don't know the issues of politics. They're just being introduced to them for the first time. So if their first exposure to it is a very conservative, disreputable source, there's no reason for them not to believe it. Same thing with if they read a very disreputable liberal source. They happen to the first thing they read about a particular topic like immigration or civil rights or climate change or something is from a reputable source, then they might be inclined to believe that, but just as much as they're inclined to believe any of the disreputable ones. So I think it has to start in high school and middle school. Media, just basic media literacy has to start with just the things that people can detect, even if they don't know the underlying facts, like spelling and grammar, and the fact that the link says sponsored, or that the picture that they use in the top and the headline doesn't really match the story, or they use a lot of adjectives in the writing, like terrible, tremendous, awful, clearly. Those kind of words are the triggers that can tip people off that, okay, maybe this isn't the most reputable site. Then when the students and citizens are more versed in the issues, then they can detect bias a little bit more easily. The Nunes memo is a perfect example. I pulled articles from 10 different sources, left to right, and that's a politically complex topic. So you can detect bias in sources by reading laterally across those about a political topic like that. But if you don't know the underlying facts, it's really difficult to detect the bias, especially in the more middle of the road sources.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that Nunez article that you wrote? I thought it was an excellent breakdown.
Yeah. I thought that was a good opportunity to measure bias against across sites. And the main reason is because it was a really big story. It was very fact dense. So the articles about it, to get all the facts of it, were long. I mean, the best articles included the actual 4-page memo itself, which you had to read, and then had some background information about what Democrats said about it and what President Trump said about it and what the media leading up to the release of the memo had said about it. So there was just a whole complex web of facts, and everybody was covering it. So one of the things, one of the indicators of bias is omission of topics, and it's really hard to tell when somebody's omitting something because it's not in the article that you're reading, right? So if you're reading a right-wing news source, you can't tell that it's being biased because it's not reporting a story that's in a left-wing news source, because you can't tell that just by looking at your right-wing news source. So because the Nunez memo was such a big story, everyone had to cover it. So if somebody was omitting this story, that would have been a huge indication that something was up with that source. All right. So all the sources that I clicked on and took screenshots of were covering this story, and it was additionally interesting because the analysts and pundits, people who write analysis articles and opinion articles, had a long time to prepare for this. Like, they knew this was coming, and people on the right really wanted a different outcome than people on the left. So you could tell, the coverage of the story was going to align pretty well with what our Republican and Democratic elected officials wanted it to say. So if something aligned with your liberal Congress people, then you could fairly safely assume as a liberal source. If something aligned with the conservative Congress people, you could assume it as a conservative source. But then the range of characterizations of this Nunez memo was really something that you could compare and contrast across sources. So the kind of hyperbole, something like Breitbart, about how this was just the worst thing ever for the Mueller investigation. He's getting fired and Trump is innocent. I mean, there was just really a lot of hyperbole on Breitbart. Fox News also had an extraordinary amount of spin and hyperbole, as one would expect. But then you could see certain blogs, for example, redstate.com. They're not a very reputable source, but they're, I believe, I could be mistaken, but I believe the editor really does not like Donald Trump. So their spin on it, even though they're a very conservative source, was not as dramatic as Breitbart or Fox News. The comparison just it filled in really nicely across the spectrum. When you go all the way to the left, this was just the biggest. If you go all the way to the left, it was just the biggest nothing burger, and Nunez made a fool out of himself, and the opposite ends really told opposite stories. And then you could find, because there were so many facts covered, you could really see easily what was being omitted in the fact pattern that could subtly skew create a slight partisan lean left or right in these more reputable news sources like Washington Post or New York Times or Wall Street Journal. Those are a lot closer and a lot more reputable, but you can detect subtle bias when you compare really fact-dense stories in those instances.
Right. I personally just really liked the way that you broke this down and you got it from so many sources. Like, for instance, I can look and see that you pulled from Red State, but you also pulled from Occupy Democrats, which they're both on the bottom of that chart, but they're almost at the same level. So you really get to see hyper partisanship on both sides. And then you also have, going back towards things like the Washington Post, where, you get more closer to just analysis of facts and getting the article, whether, it does skew liberal. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but it would be what I would consider a trusted source as opposed to something like you say Breitbart or National Review. I did find that really, really interesting, just being able to go through the different ones. It's very eye-opening. It's a very clear example of exactly what you're talking about because it is that same topic.
Yeah. You mentioned that even the reputable sources tend to interview skew a little bit liberal. And I think that happens a lot because there's not necessarily a center on a lot of stories. I mean, there's just really no dead center of certain issues. I mean, some are like objectively worse for one party than another party. Some stories, for example. So I think when you're comparing these stories, it's helpful to find the most center-ish one, but recognize that it's likely going to fall to the left or to the right of what one would consider a dead center, opinion, because there really isn't one in a lot of issues.
Right. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about something that is currently going on and possibly going to be going through in the next couple of months, maybe even sooner. And that's the Sinclair Tribune merger that is currently passing its way through our very lackadaisical FCC. It didn't used to be lackadaisical, but it has sure gotten that way. So, we just dealt with net neutrality with them and we saw how that worked out. And now we're looking at Sinclair Tribune, which I believe the numbers put it at, if this merger goes through, they would own 72% of our local news stations. And if anyone doesn't know the background to this, the reason that is problematic is because so many people rely on local news on television to get their news. And it's 46% of polled Americans say they got their news from local sources. 41% said they trust their local news, as opposed to 21% who said that they trust the national news. So that's a very big difference, 46 to 21%. We know that Sinclair has they have what are called must runs, which are partisan opinion pieces, which in some cases have to be run up to 9 times a week, which is obviously more than once a day, which means those are just partisan political opinion pieces that are going out to the local populace and not ever being identified as, this is not your local news. This is a nationwide thing that Sinclair is putting out there. What do you think about that kind of merger, that kind of monopoly on local news? What do you think could be an outcome if this were to really happen?
Yeah, I think it's sad and it's problematic. And what I think will happen with those numbers of trust is that they'll go down because news consumers can still tell when something is opinion. A lot of them can. So when people start noticing that their conservative opinion is being sprinkled into their local news report, I think a lot of people will like it less. Obviously, people who are inclined to agree with that information will like it more. It'll have the effect of polarizing local news, which is a shame because, as you said, people trust local news. And the reason why people trust local news more than national news, that statistic on whether they trust national news is interesting because there's got to be a synthesis of CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and national broadcast news, I would imagine, because those are around the same numbers. Those sources are trusted. So people realize that there is opinion and analysis sprinkled within MSNBC, CNN, and Fox, which is why they don't trust it.
Right.
So I think the trust numbers will go down for local news, but the reason people have trusted local news in the past is because it's the just the facts type of reporting. It's the regular traditional journalism that people are accustomed to, and it is about their local community. And it's harder to be really super partisan about local politics just because it's really where the rubber hits the road and people have to work together to solve very practical local problems like potholes or libraries or education funding, things like that. So, journalists are on the ground covering this is what happened. This is the crime in the community. These are the health issues in the community. These are what's happening with our local government. And it's just been the source of regular reporting, which people can tell when it's regular reporting. So some people, will start to trust the news, their local news less, but some people will not be able to tell the difference. And that's where I think that's dangerous, because there are, the people who have been accustomed to relying on the news, local news for a long time and not realizing why, may not notice these subtle things that are slipped in and may just think that, okay, well, that's the way it is. Obviously, not everyone is good at detecting opinion and bias, and it could certainly have a profound effect on what people believe. I mean, that what the press says does make a really big difference.
Right. When I was looking at the PBS article, it's a very short video. When I was watching that and seeing that not only are they putting in these must runs, which are these short opinion clips, not only do they have that, but you're seeing that they have slipped in bias or leading questions leading into their news segments where, it'll be something that it's almost innocuous, but not quite, where it's still a little obvious. But then when they show you, and we'll post this on our blog so people can see it, but when they show you, the same exact sentence being said by 20 different news anchors in 20 different localities throughout the country, it's very disheartening to see that just something as simple as leading into a news story with that sort of question, that it was, something along the lines of the firing. I believe it was about the firing of James Comey or the Russian investigation. And it was this very leading question. And it made me feel so bad, because I know that when I grew up, my family always had the news on, especially my mom. She still does. It's like 24/7 in her house. And she always says it's local news. And I understand what she's saying, because she watches local news. She wants to know what's going on locally. She wants to know as soon as it happens. And it's just sort of background noise for her. But it makes me sad that I know so many people like that. My grandmother was very much like that. I feel like there's going to come a time when it's very, I keep going back to the word insidious, because that's how it feels. It feels very, it's a slow creep. It's the ivy of political partisanship. It's going to keep growing and keep growing until I'm just worried that it'll take over. And I think you're right. It'll create another place that we can't trust to get the news that we need. And that's sad to me, because then everyone has to be a media critic, or they have to really look into where they get their news. And it's disappointing, because not everyone has the time to do that. That's why I'm glad there are people like you to make this chart, because, it gives people a nice visual that they can look at and glance at really briefly and say, okay, all right, I know where it falls. I can know if I want to trust this source. But it becomes really scary as a media consumer, which, in this day and age, it's like 5-6 hours a day. It's almost like a job every day feels like a year sometimes, depending on how many things happen in that day.
No, you're right. And people need to get good at detecting the content and analyzing the content of what's being fed to them. It's a hard skill to teach. But I think that if we can train people to spot it to an extent, and certain indicators of bias and certain tools for influence are, as you said, insidious. And really spotting these individual context clues can really help. Ownership itself doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, because, Sinclair Broadcast Group, is a conservative organization, and they're, promoting these conservative must-run segments and whatnot. But, people will say on the left, the source is untrustworthy because of these biased things that they do. And then people who watch the local news will say, well, no, not really. You can't just say just because they own it, then that it's biased. Because look, that story about the car crash, I mean, that's not biased. That's true. It's just local news. And that's true.
Right.
So you have to look at individual pieces of content, like individual articles, individual stories, individual shows. Well, one mechanism that Fox uses to get their viewers to agree that they are fair and balanced is that they will have liberal commentators and guests on their shows. Now, they're far outweighed by conservative ones, and the majority, if not all, the hosts have conservative bents, and the way that they present the news in terms of analysis and opinion is all very conservative. The focus on the stories is conservative, and there's a differentiation at Fox between, analysis, opinion, and news. They have certain hours that are better than others, but people will say, no, what I like about Fox is they always have somebody there from the other side, so therefore it's balanced. But that itself doesn't constitute balance, and it doesn't mean that everything else that they're feeding somebody is not very biased. So that makes people let their guard down. They're like, oh, well, if they're showing me both sides of the story, I don't have to worry about checking the other channels. MSNBC does this too. I mean, there are conservative commentators on MSNBC. There are conservative hosts as well. And, people fall into the trap of not analyzing the particular sentence or article or story that they're being told just on its own merit.
What do you have seen so much? You have really broken down some interesting articles. And I was wondering, is there a news source or even an article, if you wanted to get that specific, that you consider to be the most dangerous, that people should just avoid at all costs?
Hannity on Fox. People who watch Fox would give me a hard time for that. They would accuse me of liberal bias for that. But here's the reason for that. Fox and Friends is a close second. It's because the level of opinion and hyperbole on Hannity in particular, who admits that he's not a journalist, that he's an entertainment figure, and even people who watch the show say, "Oh, he's not a journalist. He knows that he's kind of a blowhard, and that's what people watch him for the entertainment value." It's dangerous because our elected officials listen to it and believe it. And the danger sometimes of conservative media or liberal media is not so much that it exists, but the extent to which people believe the things in it that are not true. Because there are certain conclusions that Hannity jumps to, like, for example, that Robert Mueller is just irreparably biased and should be fired, and this investigation should be stopped. Now, there is no one no serious journalist thinks that is the case. There's no evidence to support that, and it's the ultimate leaping to a grand conclusion with the little bits of facts that he may use to support that conclusion. So, but our elected officials, including our highest one, listens to that and will convince themselves of the truth of it. And I think you saw the danger of that in the Nunes memo, because some of the most right-wing elected officials, congresspeople like Representative Matt Gaetz, he believed that this was just a bombshell. This was going to take down the whole investigation. This memo has to be released, and the American people need to be told the truth. And he went on Fox News and said that, and then Fox News believed him, or Hannity in particular believed him, and just kept spreading that and kept hyping that up over days and days and days. And because that was on Fox News, which are other Republican members of Congress and the president watch and believe, they're like, yeah, this is a big deal. This is everything. We have to release it. Norms be damned, consequences be damned. We're going to release it because my news has convinced me that it is a big deal. And then it came out, and across the spectrum, it turned out to be factually not a big deal. and actually damaging to the Republican point of view on the investigation. So because of that cycle and the interdependence between the influence of Fox, especially Hannity, on our elected officials at the moment, I think it's the most dangerous source. I
think I would totally agree with you, especially since he gets, I mean, we know that he gets way higher numbers than something like InfoWars or The Blaze or even Breitbart. I mean, that's usually the biggest problem I have. And that's been something that has been ongoing is, Fox has always been like, oh, the mainstream media. And I'm like, mainstream media? You guys have the highest numbers of any news program by far for over a decade. You are the mainstream media. Like, you're not picking up 10 cups to listen to Fox News over a string. Like, they are mainstream media. So when they talk about mainstream media, I just laugh because I think, what are you talking about? You're talking about yourself at this point. And I will say that we make fun of Hannity quite a lot. There are several times that we threaten each other with getting red string because we're going to have to pull out the old Hannity chalkboard and start making our boxes and start connecting the dots and come up with all the conspiracies. But that's what I think he is kind of at heart, is a conspiracy theorist. And he wants to be the person who finds out the secret and he wants to let you in on the secret. And I'm just, I keep going back to, it's probably, if only one, you go back to what you said at the very beginning, if only one person knows the secret, it's probably not true. Unless that person was in the room for whatever the secret was. Because, I mean, otherwise, how are you getting this information unless you are just either jumping to assumptions or you're making it up?
And if people could detect when somebody is stating an opinion or jumping to a conclusion and distinguish that from when somebody's like doing an analysis or making an argument supported in fact, that would be really helpful. But, people don't necessarily have time to do that. And it's hard to do. So, hopefully my chart can help people in that regard.
Yeah, I definitely think it will. I'm really excited to, we'll put it up on the site and I'll put it up on our Facebook page as well. And I just really think it's so really very useful for just even a quick glance to be like, oh yeah, that's right. Maybe I'm not going to share that HuffPost article, or maybe I'm not going to share the New Republic today or the Federalist today, even though I thought that this article might be true. And there are things that I see on there that I just think, like the Daily Mail. Where I lived in the UK for a couple of years, and I'm very familiar with the Daily Mail. Like, if they could still have naked women in it, they would.
I've had Brits apologize to me on my blog for the Daily Mail. Just as a national embarrassment. Their own view. It is. But it's very interesting that it has such wide reach, is really widely read in the UK and widely read enough that it makes it over here to cover U.S. politics.
So before I let you go, we ask a question of all of the people we bring on to this show. Our tagline for the show is spread jam, not lies. So we want to put out there great things. We want to dispel lies, and we want to put out there wonderful things. So we try to have a jam of the week. And then we also have what's called Kelly's Not Lies of the week, which is usually my book of the week. So what I want to do is I just want to ask you, what's your favorite jam? So do you have a favorite jam that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I'm hoping you mean a song, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I'm a fan of anything by Green Day. That's just my favorite band of all time. But I really love one of the new ones from their Revolution Radio album called Revolution Radio. So I think it's perfect for this day and age, and it just rocks.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll put a link up on the blog for it. Vanessa, thank you so much for taking your time with us. I know that our listeners appreciate it. Beth and I appreciate it. She's going to be better soon. She's going to be really excited to hear this interview. Yes, me too. So thank you so much again. And again, this is Vanessa Otero. It's mediabiaschart.com. and also allgeneralizationsareFalse.com. And thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kelly, thanks for doing that for me.
Yeah.
Without me.
I had a great time talking to Vanessa.
It was really interesting to hear some of the things that she had to say, and I especially liked her views about Sean Hannity. I'm not going to lie.
Agreed.
I appreciate her views there. One thing I wanted to talk to you about and see from your impressions of talking with her is, how do you think media bias fits in with fake news?
You mean the chart that she made?
Well, I mean, does media bias cause fake news to happen? Do you think that from having that bias, does this, like she was talking about with Sean Hannity, with the opinions and he not being a journalist and it just being, his opinion is what it comes down to. Right. There are people on her chart like the Palmer Report and InfoWars that are just bogus fake news. Right. Palmer Report is a liberal site. InfoWars is a conservative site. It happens on both sides. But that bias can lead to them creating fake news to support their theories, right. I think.
No, I would agree with you. I feel as though I believe that the more bias you have, the more likelihood it is that you are spreading fake news. And I'll be honest with you, I think that doesn't even just relate to the fake news outlets themselves. I believe that that's just your average person. The more bias you have, the more likelihood you are to believe a story that feeds your own personal bias.
Yeah.
And therefore you're more likely to disseminate those stories. I mean, we know, even if you take the fake story that Sean Hannity put out earlier this week about the sperm on Obama's forehead for the National Portrait Gallery picture.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. That he had to delete. And, he actually.
So here's what that is if you haven't seen it. There is a conspiracy theory about Obama's portrait already.
Right.
Because the painter in the past has painted sperm into paintings. And that's like one of his things. And there's this forehead vein on Obama's forehead that is represented on his real forehead that the artist painted, that they're saying is the artist putting a sperm on his face.
A giant one, too.
Huge.
It was a ridiculous sort of, and it made me think, how obsessed are you people? How obsessed is Sean Hannity to be going over the picture piece by piece? What was he looking for?
Yeah. Was
he looking for a hidden flag of Kenya? What is he looking for? He is a crazy person. I mean, they were to blow it up as big as he did and to try to find something, you have to be looking. Yeah. It's like the people who used to listen to rock albums backwards. You have to want to hear something.
Right.
You have to get to a point in your own head where you think there's definitely something there. So I'm going to find it, whether it's there or not. And you sort of trick your mind into saying, this is definitely something that it's not.
Right. Oh my gosh. That is crazy.
Yeah.
And that is his bias showing. Sean Hannity, your bias is showing.
It is. And you know what? Everyone who shared that story, your bias is also showing.
Yes. Nice. Well, if you guys enjoyed this episode and you want to come back for some more, I will be on top of my game next time. I will be back from the dead is all I'm saying.
Even if she's a zombie, we're going to have Beth back next week.
Unless Russia, damn it, gets me again with this. They've hacked into me somehow. Okay, so why don't you tell them about the social media? Because I'm sure my voice is very pleasant to listen to right now.
Sure. So you can find us on Twitter at Podcast Fake News. We're also on Facebook, same thing, at Podcast Fake News. Our website, Podcast Fake News. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play. We're on YouTube. We're on iHeartRadio. We're on Spotify. If you have a podcast, if you have a place you listen to your podcast, we're there. And if you can, please go ahead and subscribe, rate us, give us 5 stars so more people can find us. Tell all your friends about us. We're awesome. We want everyone to listen. We want everyone to stop fake news in its tracks and know how to fight it.
That's right. All right. Well, hey, until next time, spread jam.
Not lies.